Good evening. Welcome to the Mariners Museum for the celebration of our superb research library's acquisition of its 75,000th volume. The actual book is a new voyage round the world, written by British navigator, surveyor, and buccaneer William Dampier in the late 1600s. My name is John Hightower. I'm the president of the Mariners Museum, and it is wonderful to be in a room filled with so many kindred spirits, all suffering from AMS, Aubrey-Maturin syndrome. We all know the symptoms of this malady: loss of sleep, rampant imagination, heart pounding with loss of breath during most disastrous chances, and hairbreadth escapes in the imminent deadly breach, to borrow shamelessly from Shakespeare. The condition is often accompanied by acute dictionary reflex. And even, upon occasion, a touch of Marthambles. I think it was volume 5. It is comforting to see in this evening's audience a veritable pride of admirals, suggesting that the Navy endorses this sweet affliction that Mr. O'Brien has caused us. My thoroughly pleasing task this evening is to introduce our guest. However, before I do so, I must discharge a few administrative unpleasantries. Mr. O'Brien will be available for signing books after the evening's conversation for a very brief time only. It is simply not possible for him to sign books for everyone who would like him to. And in fact, one book per pair of tickets. Those with more than that will be turned over to the signature police. A grisly, ominous group, if ever there was. And if you think they're bad, the photograph police are even meaner. Please do not take any photographs at all. Unfortunately, the person who is to have been our talk show host this evening, Louis Lapham, editor of Harper's Magazine, is unable to be with us this evening because of a last-minute deadline crisis. He called me just before noon and reminded me of why I never liked working for a magazine. As a result, I am his stand-in tonight. Mr. Lapham, I should add, is the cause, by way of a mutual friend in California, of my hopeless addiction to Patrick O'Brien's novels about Captain Jack Aubrey, Dr. Stephen Maturin, the beautiful, able Sophie, the irresistible, exciting, maddening Diana Villiers. Our special guest this evening is the man who has conjured up the characters who inhabit these novels and our lives, and who, I predict in time, will be as legendary as Admiral Horatio Nelson, appearing in portrait this evening between Mr. O'Brien and me. Born in 1914, Patrick O'Brien began his lifelong writing career in the 1930s. In 1952, his novel Testimonies was called by Delmore Schwartz a triumph and compared him favorably to William Butler Yeats. In my wildest imaginings. In the 1960s, Mr. O'Brien wrote Master and Commander, the first in his famous, impeccably researched Aubrey-Maturin series set in the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. As all of you here know, Commodore, with a publication date of tomorrow, April 12, 1995, is the 17th novel in the series. James Hamilton Patterson, writing in the New Republic, states, "Despite his own self-deprecations, Patrick O'Brien is unquestionably the Homer of the Napoleonic Wars." Those of us here tonight agree. Mr. O'Brien, the hour is yours. the pleasure in your sharing it is ours. The question that seems to suit this occasion that I'd like to begin with is, because it's so much on the minds of the Mariners Museum and our wonderful library, is how do you manage your research for these novels, and is material ever sent to you? This is a question I want the librarian to hear the answer to. And do you ever receive copies of original documents from any library sources? Or?
Yes, I do. But I receive a good many things from people whose ancestors were sailors. They send me some quite fascinating pieces sometimes. But the whole mass of my research, it took place a long, long time ago. To begin with, I was rather a sickly child and youth, and I read an immense amount. It so happened that I was in a largish country house that had volume after volume of the Gentleman's Magazine. Went on and on and on, as your librarian will know. The Naval Chronicle is nothing to a Gentleman's Magazine. And I grew deeply soaked in idiom of middle, second half of the 18th century particularly. And then I fell upon the Naval Chronicle, which obviously did infinitely more in that line. And I read omnivorously. I had plenty of time so to do. And you see, I don't have to do an awful lot now, apart from looking up the odd Timinogi and the like, because a great deal of the groundwork has been done. It stays with me in what I'm laughing to call my memory. More does come in from these sources that I've mentioned, people who kindly send me their great-grandfather's letters. Or a perfectly delightful thing happened the other day. A man I know in England, William Walgrave, is I forget, his great-great-great-grandfather was Admiral Walgrave. And the Walgraves are a family who stayed in one house since Bloody Mary's time, the manor of Chewton. William Walgrave, when first we met, was Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. And his ancestor going back to just before Queen Elizabeth I was also Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. And he was given this manor and a peerage by Bloody Mary. He was a Catholic, of course. When Elizabeth first came in, he was carted off to the Tower. But before he could be charged with high treason and general wickedness, he very discreetly died. So,
good timing.
so the manor has remained with the Walgraves. And they've accumulated a fantastic archive, including the letters of a later William Walgrave. They go in sequences. When he was a midshipman in Napoleon it was, and a little before. He eventually became an admiral of the fleet, but those letters have been preserved, and William, the present William's mother is a trained historian, and she has put them into a marvelously readable form, and that's my most recent acquisition of most uncommon material. If Greenwich can't get them, you should have a try at getting them. But
we'll do our best.
And really, that is about the sum of my acquisitions, that being the most recent.
Now, the reading...
I beg your pardon. May I just introduce a parenthesis about the Marthandals?
Yes, please do. Any enlightenment you can shed on.
Well, many people have asked me about the Marthandals. Some fear they may have the Marthandals, or even the strong fives, which is worse.
Ooh.
And I know
Yes, I know
nothing
those.
whatsoever about either. They arose from a quack's pamphlet of about 1720 that I came across in a mass of papers in the factory. And he had an ointment in which I think toads, and to a rather lamentable extent, I'm fond of toads, but it cured the moth ambles, and 2 or 3 boxes of it would cure the strong fives.
I hope I never get the strong fives.
Yeah, I feel it's sort of awful driving. Because in the bills of mortality of the late 18th century, you may remember, one of the not unimportant figures was those who died of the griping of the guts.
The griping of
The griping of the guts. And I feel the strong fives must have been closely allied.
Grievously. One of the things that has always, that I love about your novels is that the language is so rich, and it appears ideally suited to the time in which you write. Is it, when you mentioned being steeped in the idiom through your readings as a young person, do you hear the voices of that idiom when you?
Oh, quite certainly, yes. It's theirs for me. I do a lot of my writing in the night, walking on a far mountain road, because I don't sleep well, walking when there's really nobody about apart from the odd wild boar. Then I walk and there's the steady beat of feet, and dialogue springs into being. That's as near as I can get to the process of creation. It just happens. And though that's a particularly fortunate circumstance for me, I mean, that kind of environment is propitious.
I was also wondering about some literary antecedents that you particularly admire, and whose rhythm and cadence and language is particularly meaningful to you.
There are many, quite certainly many. But speaking of 18th century, essentially Johnson, but his language is far, far more balanced than mine, and far, far, far grander. But his more, as it were, domestic writing, like the lives of the poets, that suits me admirably well. But very much more than that, Fielding and Richardson, and above all Jane Austen, that perfectly glorious mistress of English and of the semicolon. But rather, I mean, quite seriously, she'll sometimes put a semicolon where almost nobody else will. And the effect is enchanting.
That's wonderful. A teacup full of semicolons sprinkle about at will. Of course, naval architecture and impenetrable naval terms are part of your writing.
Yes, but they have to be, they may be impenetrable, but they just have to be right. Somebody now and then is going to penetrate.
Very
it just has to be right.
I was given a list of naval terms, and the only one only two I recognized. One was mashy, and the other was niblick. But I thought they were golf clubs, not naval terms. The naval architecture intrigues me, particularly the differences at the time between the American frigates, the heavy frigates, and the British frigates, and then the French ships, which were so often captured by the British because the British were constantly beating them and capturing the French ships, and the references in your work about how well they sail. Can you speak anything? Can you tell us anything about the differences of that?
Yes. Well, the French naval architects were very often highly scientific men like Duhamel, and they were just far, far better builders. They had a 74 before the Royal Navy had a 74, and the Invincible, the first 74, was built on French lines. They captured a French 74, the RC, kept her name, and she kept her splendid sailing qualities. The same applies to frigates. They started frigates. They made very, very fine ones. Their sailors weren't nearly as good as their builders. They didn't go to sea to anything like the same extent. And Surprise, for example,
Yes.
a frigate that I very often refer to, she was originally French.
Do you see an odd paradox in the fact that you've created such a wonderful universe for us, but so much of it occurs on a single ship? Do you ever find that the ship is confining for a literary license, or?
No, I don't, brother. No, it's a convenience in many ways. I know exactly where I am. But I can and do shift around. I had Worcester and a few other vessels. And at present, the book I'm working on now is another 74.
There was a ship you mentioned in one of the early novels that had the unfortunate habit of moving backwards.
Yes.
What?
There were two like that. There was the Arrow and the Dart, and they were lamentable experiments. They were,
Were they for a particular
well,
kind of weapon?
there was an influential man who said, look, this is the way to build a ship. And he had so much influence that they were built. And they did go backwards.
It would be unsettling. In terms of natural history, that it's such a strong element in your novels. I'd be interested. I think we'd be interested in knowing where this fascination for natural history came from, and whether or not you read historical novels or
Very few historical novels. There are one or two good ones. The Cloister and the Hearth, for example. Charles Reed. Did you ever come across it? I thought it frightfully good when I was young. But Scott I can't cope with at all. It's true I haven't tried for a long, long time. But then, you see, historical novel, what does one mean? You can call all Homer an historical novel, all that which is dealing with the Trojan War. He recreates, he changes, he adorns. It's far back, it's historical. You see, where's the odds? It's true that nowadays people have tended to make a curious kind of genre, which started, I think, the present genre probably started with Scott, but there were many earlier ones. There was Madame de Lafayette, the Princesse de Clèves, which I think is one of the finest French psychological novels that ever was, and it's dated, let's see, about 150 years back, and all we can. And I don't think people take that into account when they utterly scorn the genre.
The amount of discovery in your novels has led one person to comment that there seems an order to the universe of the late 18th century and 19th century that is sadly lacking today. If you, steeped as you are in the period that you write about, when you return from your walks and have to enter the late 20th century again, is there anything you would like to bring back with you to recreate for this time that you feel is missing from missing that used to be part of the period that you write about?
Yes, I do, but that is a really vast sociological disposition, isn't it, to put things in that way. But I would say that very broadly, there appeared to be a rough social balance, pretty unjust in many ways, in Jane Austen's time, and there's now no social balance of any kind whatsoever, at least in Western Europe.
And I mean, there's an element of chivalry. It seems the captured ship, the captain of the captured ship is invited to dine with the victorious captain.
Yes, and that, I mean, there's documentary evidence for it through and through. There's no sort of doubt that that did exist.
And they took relatively good care of one another when they were captured, did they not?
Yes, they did. The French had rather a bad reputation for looting. I mean, the French seamen. But the officers behaved extremely well on the whole.
I was also awfully pleased to, when Captain Aubrey captured the French ship with the Mouton Rothschild in it.
So was he.
Find that particularly pleasant reading. That took me away.
Oh, I must tell you a little thing I found, speaking of wine. Chateau Lafitte belongs to the Rothschilds, as you know.
Yes.
And there was such a pleasant man speaking on the English wines about wine. And he went to see Victor Rothschild, who gave him a bottle of 1904, Chateau Lafitte. And he said to Rothschild, would he be vulgar if I were to ask you how many more bottles of this you have? And Rothschild said, no, not at all. But it would be vulgar if I were to tell you.
I guess this is a question you get asked fairly often, but how do you explain your sudden popularity?
I'm perfectly amazed, but quite pleased. But I have no explanation at all. None.
You wrote in the recent Patrick O'Brien newsletter, of which I am a faithful subscriber, about the matter of phase, I think you called it.
Yes. Yes, there is the possibility of my now coming into phase with the general thing. I'll tell you one thing that quite certainly had an effect in this country at any rate. And that was a perfectly lovely review by Richard Snow. He said that he would walk the plank for me. Quite what good he thought that would do me, I don't know, but it was obviously very kindly intended.
A generous gesture,
Yes,
nonetheless.
And that was in the New York Times, a respectable paper. And it had a considerable effect. I mean, the fact that this open, publicly avowed willingness to walk the plank.
Perhaps we could get some other people to make that offer and take them up on it. I know there are some people here who are going to want me to ask whether or not there will be a glossary for your novels, and I should say that before you answer that I have just received today a copy of the Henry Holt and Company publication, which they describe it as a lexicon and companion for Patrick O'Brien's seafaring tales. And the first word I looked up, which was Mothambles, was not in it. So.
No, as for that, I know nothing of this publication at all. But I know that there is a companion to these things being compiled by a very eminent naval historian belonging to Greenwich. You couldn't get much better, could you?
No, you certainly
Not
couldn't. One of your fans in Newport News is a gentleman I think is here this evening, Dr. Peach, and he is on his third reading of the series. He is dazzled by the medical research and information that you include. How did you come to be so interested in that aspect?
Well, I might reply that there some nihil humani on there, alienum puto. But I mean, I have a body. I am deeply interested in it. It was extremely sick. It was looked after by medical men, and of course, a certain amount of medical knowledge comes by osmosis, and then general reading. You know, one reads a fair amount.
Yes.
I think that's well over general answer.
And the characters who we live with do you have specific individuals in mind that you've drawn them from, or have they a pastiche of various?
There are one or two capers that Aubrey gets up to that were indulged in by Lord Cochrane. He too captured a Spanish sea frigate of 32 guns in a brig of 14. I am able to say that Jack Aubrey did so because I know that the fact did occur. It's historically vouched for, Otherwise, it's scarcely believable.
It sure is wonderful reading, though. Nelson, of course, is such a hero and an astonishing man. Is there anything particular about what was his? Did he have any particular genius that you can pinpoint, or was it management, or what was it?
He was eminently charismatic. He was always very kind to his ratings, and very often to his officers. Very particularly kind to his midshipmen. You remember one wretched boy who was sent to sea by his family. He daren't go aloft. And you know, when you look up Masters of Victory, it's an awful long way. And Nelson went up to putting his feet on off to now, saying, "Don't look down," and he got him up to the masthead. And that sort of thing, I mean, the man who can do that is likely to do innumerable less spectacular acts of kindness. Now, there was a book recently published, the Recollections of an American Seaman. It was edited by Professor Dan of an American university, whose name escapes me, but your librarian will know him. He served under Washington. He served under Nelson. He was a chap who had seen the world to a considerable extent. And he spoke of a very unfortunate state of affairs in an English frigate whose captain was homosexual, and discipline went by the board. They didn't like his replacement, who was a very hard-bitten kind of fellow, and there was the edge of very, very ugly mutiny. Nelson came aboard and said, "You people have always behaved frightfully well. You took a French frigate in very adverse circumstances. You're surely not going to disobey your proper captain." And they yielded like lambs. And he described this man, the American, writing his memoirs in old age. He describes the thing with a singular simplicity that is totally convincing. You must get hold of it. I'm sure your colleagues will have better memories than mine, and will give you the man's name.
Wonderful. I would like to open the questioning up from the floor, but I will ask that you limit your questions to Mr. O'Brien's work, if you would. Yes?
Did you write Mr. Mullet's poems, or were they out of the poetry magazines in the period?
No, I'm not quite sure which poem you mean. He did several, didn't he?
Yes.
Now, some will be from the Naval Chronicle, and some I think I perhaps improved upon.
Ever the translator. Yes.
Mr. O'Brien, what gave birth to the Aubrey-Maturin series? What is it that brought them to life?
Well, long before then, I wrote a book based on Anson's circumnavigation. To write that book, I put an Irish midshipman aboard and sent him round and seeing this circumnavigation through the young man's eyes. I took immense pleasure in writing it. It gave me absurd pleasure. I laughed a lot of the time while I was writing it, and I did it in a very short time. I mean, a matter of weeks. To be sure, there are 52 weeks in a year, but when I say weeks, it was very short time. And I enjoyed it very much indeed. And then, I'm not quite sure what the stimulus for the Aubrey-Maturin ones was, but there was that pleasure in the background, and I think the American publisher asked me whether I wouldn't like to do something of that kind on a totally adult scale. And I think that was the one, that was the main stimulus. But in any case, I had something of that kind in my mind for a long while, and that, as we might say, sparked it and set it going.
Yes, in the back. In the back, next to the camera. Yeah.
Mr. O'Brien, one of the things that fascinates me the most about your stories are the musical evenings that they have, Stephen and Jack playing their violin and cello. And I wondered on a commercial note whether anybody had suggested making a tape of...
Yes, they have. They have indeed.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm so gratified that Captain Aubrey leaves his Amati violin at home.
Yes, rather. Yeah, he has a conscience.
Yes.
That's it. I'm afraid then as now, medical men are open to temptation and their opportunities were dreadfully wide. But the cocaine was pretty rare. I do know of 2 or 3 French physicians who became addicted to the leaf. Quite early. Laudanum, of course, it was very general. I mean, think of De Quincey and Coleridge and many another man.
Yes.
Sir, your description of the maritime environment, descriptive writing of sailing and the sea, are so rich, but I heard no reference to your own time at sea. Is there really so?
Oh, Lord, yes. I've been quite a lot at sea and in square-rigged ships too in my youth. That's back in the 30s when there were a good many.
Yes, in the back, sort of 2/3 of the way. Yes.
Did you use specific cartographic technology for the cover of your ships? Sometimes difficult to follow follow you on the regular lessons.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
I wonder if you use a particular aspect of curriculum cartography for your work.
More, I use models. I have some very fine ones, and there, you see, I can see exactly what I'm talking about and what a man can see from a given point on deck and so on. Is that what you mean?
No, I was wondering about the geographical name.
The atlas.
Oh, Lord, yes, I always use contemporary maps. They're often rather out by our modern maps, but those are the ones that they use, and those are the ones that I use. Is that, does that answer your question? Good.
Yes.
I'm reminded in the beginning of the letter of Mark, Stephen Maturin is walking to the ship, the Surprise, and he comes across Blue Breeches, who is an author, a writer,
Oh, yes.
who is composing by walking in his dell.
Yes, yes.
Is that autobiographical?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, to a slight degree, I must admit, it is to a slight degree. Though I hope I don't deepen France to quite to the same extent. But I do compose in walking, it's true.
I have a statement and a question. You had referred to an American sailor earlier. That was Jacob Nagle. The Journal of Jacob Nagle.
That's right. That's the man I'm talking of. Yes. Yes.
The question I had for you was, is there a volume on Admiral Cochrane that you would recommend?
On
Admiral Cochrane?
Admiral Cochrane.
Oh, Lord, yes, that's his own autobiography.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much. Yes.
Speaking of autobiographies, do you plan to write your autobiography? And who would you like to write your biography?
I wouldn't like it written at all.
Question back here? Yes.
Well, dumplings, to be sure, are usually more round and long. But you see, in a contemporary cookery book, no, I didn't. No. I just thought that he looked like a dumpling.
Yes.
Back to the Naval Journal. In Desolation Island, you have the ship followed by a Dutch frigate, the Waxhamheit.
Yes.
Now, the Naval Journal...
Dutch 74, I beg pardon.
Yes, it's a 74. The Naval Journal has a Dutch ship, the Waxhamheit.
Yes.
But it's a little brig. Where do you get the names of your ships?
Usually from the Naval Chronicle or the like, but Waxhamheit was quite a usual name for Dutch men of war and traders too.
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien, many pleasurable hours I've had reading your work. One passage, your 11th volume, the verse in the metal, pillory scene in the square. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you visualize that scene and how difficult was that for you to write?
It was very painful to write. It wasn't very difficult to visualize because, after all, there are many contemporary accounts, sometimes with prints, of a man put in a pillory. Horrible business. Very ugly.
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien, on the internet, when there are discussions of your books, there's usually a period in which people will spend time casting characters to play the various characters in your books. I won't go into any of the details, but in viewing these characters and in thinking about Hollywood making a movie of your books, have you come to any conclusions?
No, I haven't really. I don't know much about film. It just hasn't impinged upon me.
At play in cyberspace.
Follow-up question. Could you explain Diana? Is she a modern woman moved back to that time?
Not a bit, not a bit. They've existed right up from there.
Here, here.
I mean, look at some of Chaucer.
Yes.
I didn't catch that. I'm sorry.
In
Narrator in the cassette.
in the cassette, the narrator in the cassette tape of Master and Commander.
Yes,
Did you?
he was Mr. Brown, I believe.
Patrick, there are two. There are two recordings. Patrick Saul was the man I heard.
Yes. Certainly, I listened to him with great approval indeed.
Mr. Ryan, in your works, you use a little sprinkling of phrases in Latin and Greek, and you made references to the figures of antiquity. What is your training in the classics? Have you read widely in Latin and Greek?
Yes. I mean, it's for... I'm sorry, a favorite author. Well, Homer, obviously, in Greek, closely followed by Sappho, and in Latin, not the least now, Horace. Well, instead of rather curiosity, you know, Horace had a Sabine farm given to him. And a Sabine farm is a general term for somewhere for pleasant relaxation. Now, in one of these naval tales, I have a man called Blaine, Sir Joseph Blaine, who, as well as being the head of naval intelligence, is also an entomologist. And I think I have Maturin saying, Sir Joseph has gone back to his Sabine beetles. And my Spanish translator, a young lady of perhaps not very wide reading, has written very anxiously to me from Texas to ask whether Sabine, too, was a student of beetles. Such things happen.
Yes.
Sir, one of the earlier naval officers with which I am familiar was named Horatio Hohenwald. Do you ever have any comparison between Jack and Horatio?
Yes, there were fairly early on. There were comparisons, and I have nothing really to say much about their validity. It's how you look at these things. Royston had a brilliant turn at the description of an action, well, I won't say more about him because I should feel I should sound jealous or invidious. But his actions were perfectly brilliant. Of that there is no doubt.
Could you please write a book a week?
The other day, my publisher showed me a curious little machine that he put on his lap and tapped things, figures appeared. And today, I was much intrigued by this, and today I looked at an advertisement in a magazine in the aeroplane in which I was traveling, and it showed one of these little machines, and it said it would do, I think, 60 pages a minute, or something of that sort. And if you will buy me one of these machines, I will oblige.
Please do. Yes.
Mr. O'Brien, Captain Aubrey becomes post captain in novel number 2.
Yes.
And it's taken now, I assume, all these novels until he's finally hoisted his flag. And I'm assuming that, perhaps not. But why so long a post captain?
Well, I know John Bailey, very eminent man, professor of English literature at Oxford, has said kind things about me, but he said, how come Aubrey is hanging on so long in first captain's post? And I was rather worried by that, because after all, an Oxford professor of English literature, he should know everything. So I checked a number of contemporary men, and they generally served 25 years before they reached their flag. So Jack, it would be a little early perhaps to give him a flag. He's certainly not obliged to take a flag yet.
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien, I have a two-part question. As a physician, I'm wondering why you made Captain Aubrey obese.
He eats too much. I mean,
just 6 lamb chops for breakfast.
Climbing up and down the ring, how much does he weigh?
well, he's 16 stone at present.
What is that?
Well, a stone is 14 pounds. If you multiply one by the other, you'll... By the way, can you tell me how, with your many, many English traditions and many English ways of speech, you have dropped the stone? Because you certainly had it. You certainly had it, you know.
Yes, we did.
Oh, dear.
The other question is, I'm wondering how you received the France, since the French have regularly pasted many of your books.
Well, I shan't know that for a few months, but the Presse de la Cité are bringing out, translated by a naval officer, Clarissa Oakes, and I shall be extremely interested to see what kind of a reception it received. They've been very kind about other books of mine, such as that Picasso. They were very civil. But the naval tales, so far, they've understandably shied away from.
I was wondering what the theories of in the time where it would be about sailing out against the wind. It must have seemed like kind of like magic back then in some ways. So I wonder what Captain Aubrey or even Maturin would think
Well, after all, a fore and aft vessel will point fore into the wind with comparative ease, and square-rigged ship braced taut to and with a decent shaped hull will go 5, 5 1/4 into the wind. A clumsy one, 6. But going smack into the wind, clearly, is perfectly impossible unless you have fiends pushing it from behind.
Yes.
I raised the question of how you crossed a Catalan with an Irish person to come up with Aubrey-Maturin. That seems to be an odd combination, and how did it occur to your mind to have the Irish and the Catalonians mixing so freely?
The Irish and the
Catalans.
Catalans?
Oh,
Catalans.
well, there were lots and lots of Catholic Irish officers serving the Spanish crown as they served the Austrian. Because as Catholics, they couldn't serve the king, you see. I mean the King of England.
Yes.
At the present time, the BBC has begun a series of dramatizations of your Maturin.
So I believe the first one was the night before I left. But as we had to get up frightfully early, I didn't wait up to see it, but my agent has promised that she will wake up, stay up, and record it on one of those ingenious.
Will that be coming to the United States?
You know as well as I hope so.
Yes.
If there's one part of your series that I might be so presumed to say is unrealistic, is that Stephen Maturin every so often becomes a hero like Jean-Claude Van Damme or something, and turns around and wins duels and survives, murders people in his capacity as a spy. But the rest of the time, he's, I don't know how much, 110-pound weakling. And at one particular part, my wife and I have trouble believing is the part where he does his own operation.
Well, I really haven't anything. I mean, you think one thing, I think another.
No one else around qualified to do it. I wonder if you would mind, in closing, to read from the first chapter of Commodore.
The new book? No, I wouldn't mind a bit.
I'm
not at all a good reader aloud, but I'll have a bash. It's long since I've looked at this. Thick weather in the chops of the Channel and a dirty night, with the strong northeast wind bringing rain from the low sky and racing cloud. Ushant somewhere away on the starboard bow, the silliest to larboard, but never a light, never a star to be seen, and no observation for the last 4 days. The two homeward bound ships, Jack Aubrey's Surprise, an elderly 28-gun frigate sold out of the service some years ago, but now, as His Majesty's hired vessel Surprise, completing a long confidential mission for government, and HMS Berenice, Captain Heneage Dundas, an even older but somewhat less warm 64-gun two-decker, together with her tender the Ringo, an American schooner of the kind known as a Baltimore Clipper, had all three been sailing in company ever since they met north and east of Cape Horn, about 100 degrees of latitude or 6,000 sea miles away in a straight line, if straight lines had any meaning at all in a voyage governed entirely by the wind, the first coming from Peru and the coast of Chile, the second from New South Wales.